Hello book lovers, and welcome back, or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to give you some winter recommendations. Alright guys, so December is quick approaching. I am wearing the same thing I was wearing on my Monday video because this is the only wintry outfit that I have, but I changed my earrings. We have some little penguins going on here. That being said, I have 6 books to recommend you today that I think are perfect for the winter season. I have done a winter recommendations list before, so I will go ahead and link my recommendations playlist up above so you can check that out, as well as other recommendations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into book number 1. Up first, we have a relatively popular YA fantasy story called Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. At this point, the second book in the series is out, but it seems like there is actually going to be a third book as well. This story is inspired by the German story The Goose Girl, and we are actually following it from the perspective of who was the villain in the original story. I have to admit, I have never read The Little Goose Girl or whatever it's called, so I cannot make comparisons. However, in the story we are following Vanya, and she was the maid of a princess. However, she ends up stealing the princess's magical pearls, which allows her then to look like the princess and steal her life. She takes advantage of being this princess by going to the houses of other wealthy people and stealing from them. She is trying to collect enough money to start a new life. However, her last scheme goes wrong and she crosses the wrong god. This god curses her to become what she wants most, which means she slowly starts to turn into gems. And eventually, this will kill her. The way to stop this curse is to return everything she has stolen, every penny, and the life of the princess. I listened to both of these books as audiobooks, and I definitely suggest that you check them out. This way, I think it adds a lot to the stories and really brings the characters to life. I feel like a lot of people really enjoy reading kind of fantasy retellings during this time of year, and that is exactly what this story is. We have gods, we have a historical setting. I believe it's probably inspired by Germany, since that is where the original story was set. I personally associate Germany a lot with Christmas, not just because I myself am German, but because of their Christmas market. So I feel like it just adds a little extra layer to the story. I think, like many Christmas stories, this story really balances kind of a lightness as well as more dark and dirty themes. We have this kind of forming found family that is happening throughout the series. We have a girl who thought that she was the only one she could rely on, and so she was more than happy to step on anyone else to get what she wants. And then she kind of starts to realize that having friends and allies really improves your life, and also that there are good people out there and not just people who want something from her. So we have this feeling of hope throughout the story. But at the same time, we are also following a character who has a lot of trauma in her past, and honestly, her current situation isn't that great as well. I think that the holidays, and especially the end of the year as we're making those New Year's goals, are a great time for self-reflection, and that is something that our character in the story does quite a lot. Otherwise, it is just a fun and honestly semi-simple story to follow. I don't often listen to overly complex audiobooks because it then makes me get lost in the story, but I, for the most part, was always really rooted in the story and felt that it had a really great pacing and a really enjoyable characters. The second book on this list is another historical book. I feel like kind of fantasy and historical are the vibe for this time of year, and in this case we have Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a fae story where we are following a woman who had half of her soul stolen. Apparently, whoever stole half her soul intended to steal all of it, but luckily for her, her cousin was able to protect her, and therefore she is now just walking around with half of her soul, which makes her behave in a way that we in our society would probably consider slightly autistic. She kind of struggles a bit with having the proper emotions for the setting and sometimes says things that may seem a little out of pocket, but overall she is still a fully functioning, genuinely kind human being who very much loves her cousin. Her cousin is at this point of age to get married, and she's definitely an eligible bachelorette. Is that a thing? And she's not really interested in getting married. However, she's very interested in getting the other half of her cousin's soul back, and so she suggests to her mother that they go into the city where she can find more marriage options, but at the same time she can also find the Lord Sorcier, who she is hoping will help her cousin find the other half of her soul. One of the reasons that I selected this story is not just because of the genre and the overall vibe, it's actually because a big portion of the story revolves around workhouses, which is where the poor are staying, and usually they do some sort of tasks or in these houses to be allowed to stay, and they get very minimal wages, and the places are very dirty and cold and overcrowded, and the food isn't good, and if people get sick there isn't much action taken to help them get better, and the Lord Sorcier is working a lot with these facilities to try to improve them. And our main character, Dora, ends up joining him on these outings because some of the children in these workhouses are falling asleep and not waking up. And because they are not waking up, they're not able to drink and eat, and eventually they're withering away and dying, which is obviously a very big issue. This book, I feel like, really focuses on selflessness. Like, her cousin is like, you're with the Lord Sorcier, he says he can help you with your soul, but you're constantly focusing on helping these other people instead of focusing on your own issue. And our character is very much like, hey, we need to prioritize what's important, and children dying is more important than getting the other half of my soul. I'm happy, I'm healthy, everything is technically fine with me, and so I want to focus on helping those who have less than me. And a lot of times this time of year is where charity abounds. So I think overall that this story had a really good message, not just because it was focusing on charity and on helping those who have less than you, but also because it had a lot to do with self-acceptance. Dora, throughout the story, realizes very much that she is totally fine the way that she is. She doesn't really need to be fixed. There are people who love her and accept her just the way that she is. Mixed in with these themes is obviously also a small romance. It's not a huge part of the story, but I do really enjoy it all the same. And of course, I found the subtle magical aspect of the story intriguing as well. Book number 3 is a bit of a chonker, and that is The Sword of Kagon by M.L. Wang. So this is a fantasy story. It is technically considered a standalone. I don't feel super comfortable calling it a standalone. It is definitely a prequel to a series that has been discontinued. So to me, that's a little bit disappointing, but there are plenty of people who are fully satisfied with just this book on its own. This book is set in Kagon, which is a empire that houses some very powerful people. They can use elemental magic, and we are specifically following the Masuda family. And if I remember correctly, they can wield like water and ice, which is definitely a winter vibe. We're specifically following 2 points of view, including the young son of this family, Mamoru, as well as the wife and mother, Masaki. At the start of this book, this family starts to realize that there is a threat on the horizon and war is fast approaching. So they are starting to prepare for that event, as well as then going to war and then eventually seeing some of the after effects of the war as well. I will say that the setting of the mountainside really adds a lot to the winter vibes of this story. We also have the cold brutality of war throughout the story. There is a lot of death and gore and destruction throughout this book. The author certainly did not hold back when he was letting you know just how quick and ugly a war can start and end. The story also heavily focuses on family, since we are just following this one family throughout the years, and we see how much they lose throughout this war. It's utter destruction and very devastating to watch this mother as she loses people she cares about, watching the head of the family kind of watch everything that this family built fall and crumble around him. Mamoru is only 14 years old, and he is very quickly being thrust into adulthood and the harsh realities that come with adulthood. He is learning not just how to fight in a war, but he's also learning some misconceptions about his empire, that maybe everything he's been taught is not true. And that's very overwhelming for a young kid to have to go through all of this at one time. He's so incredibly strong. He's just the kind of character you really want to look up to and root for throughout this entire story. Masaki, on the other hand, is at this point just a mother and just a wife, and not a well-loved wife at that. She used to be incredibly powerful. She was excellent with a sword, and as this war starts to threaten her family, she's putting aside all that was expected of her family, and of her husband, and picking up that sword and defending her family. She's like, enough is enough. I'm not gonna stand by here and let these women be killed, let my children be killed. I am going to be what you never wanted me to be, and that is a warrior. And once again, we are following a very strong female character that you highly respect and are rooting for throughout this entire story. I will say that if throughout the holidays you're looking for a joyful story, one that's steeped in hope and community and just joy on earth kind of situations, this is probably not going to be that book. Obviously, there is a big sense of community and family throughout this as they come together during a time of war, but it is also a tearjerker. So if you're looking for a sad Christmas story, here you go. This is the one I recommend. Book number 4 is Silver in the Woods by Emily Tesh. I have not read the second book in this duology, but it is a 2-book series. They are both relatively short as well, so I would consider them both novellas. In this book, we are following Tobias, who I believe could be equated to the Green Man. He is living in the woods and is protecting those woods, but at the same time is protecting the woodcutters, the humans, from the woods in turn. I believe there are druids within these woods that are very connected to the trees, and sometimes out of anger, they will try and lash out at the humans, but Tobias is there to keep the peace and keep the balance. The humans do need some wood, and so when the druids attack, he tries to calm them and let them pass on to the next life after their tree is taken. One day, a wealthy man named Henry ends up buying some property by the edge of Tobias's woods, and the two end up meeting and just kind of discussing the magic of these woods. Eventually, Henry ends up getting kidnapped by something in the woods, and Tobias and Henry's mother set out to find him. This book does have some subtle queer undertones. I will say it's not like outright like a queer romance or anything, but you can definitely tell that Tobias and Henry are very much attracted to each other and enjoy each other's company and gain a lot from the other's presence. This is one of those fantasy stories that is just very subtle in its magic, almost eerie to a degree. There are mentions of fae and druids and old beings sleeping beneath the woods, and it just really gives you those cold winter vibes throughout this story. I will say, despite the eerie woods that it's set in, this story does occasionally have some cozy vibes to it as well. It never gets overly gruesome or scary, so it may be considered a little bit of a cozy fantasy, which is, I'm sure, what a lot of people want to pick up this time of year. Book number 5 is going to be Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I believe in my last winter recommendation, I suggested her other book, Spinning Silver. Her stories, her fairy tale retellings are just perfect for this time of year. In Uprooted, we are following Agnieszka. I really hope I'm saying her name correctly, and she lives in a town that is located at the edge of a magical forest that has been creeping closer and closer every year. To slow the process, or to completely stop the process of this wood devouring their village, every 10 years, I believe it is, the village will send a beautiful girl to the dragon, who is, I believe, a wizard who lives in a tower. And those girls end up never really returning. This year is a year for the dragon to return and to choose a new woman to join him. Everyone expects Agnieszka's friend to be chosen. She is considered the most beautiful, the most likable, the most intelligent, all those things. And at first it seems like he is going to choose her. However, after he looks at Agnieszka, he kind of seems to reluctantly choose her instead, and throughout the story we start to realize why he felt he had to choose her. And we also watch as Agnieszka kind of looks to put an end to the curse. She's like, hey, no more putting band-aids on this. We're gonna find the root of this problem and we're going to uproot it and destroy it, because this has destroyed so many villages and I don't want my village to be next. This also does have a subtle romance. Once again, Naomi Novik doesn't really have outright romances in her stories, but it is definitely an undertone, and it is just one of those stories where we have a man who is reluctantly in the presence of a woman and then starts to realize how incredible the woman in his presence is. Yet at the same time, we have a woman who's more than happy to stand on her own, and when the man makes his interest known, is like, well, you better prove yourself to me, okay? And that's just a vibe that I really enjoy. This story is, I believe, kind of based off Beauty and the Beast, if not a little bit of what's it called, Sleeping Beauty. And I really enjoyed the magical system in the story. I thought it was very interesting. I really liked learning about the history of these woods. It's one of those situations where you can kind of understand the feelings of the villain, but you also see that the villain has deteriorated and gone too far and now really needs to be stopped. The story has some intriguing politics in it, as well as some corruption, as we make our way not just to these towns outside of the woods, but also to the capital of this kingdom. The story has some themes on who gets to be the hero and what makes a hero, and when does a hero go too far and start to slip from heroics into villainy. So lots of fun stuff going in the story. Once again, Naomi Novik has beautiful writing that goes along perfectly with the stories she's writing. The last book on this list is a sci-fi. So all the books so far have kind of been fantasy set in a historical setting, but we're gonna pop over into the future with this sci-fi called The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreifer. This is a queer YA story where we are following Ambrose and Kodiak. So the world is coming to an end. In the future, it always is. In this case, the world's response to this was to send Ambrose and Kodiak into space to find a new planet for them to live on. In fact, I believe they have a planet in mind, and Ambrose's sister has actually crash landed there, from what I remember, and that is why he has volunteered for this mission, so that he can help his sister. Ambrose is from one country and Kodiak is from another country, and Ambrose actually doesn't know that Kodiak's gonna be there until he wakes up from hypersleep and sees that his country has made an alliance with their previously enemy country to better the odds of them finding this other country. These two boys grew up in very different worlds. However, when the ship starts to act strangely, the two of them are going to have to work together to survive. This is one of those books where for the first half, I was like, this is a good time, you know, we're having fun. Things are getting a little weird, but I'm interested in the romance that is developing, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where the story is going. And then bam, like at the 50% mark, there is some sort of huge twist that occurs and completely changes the trajectory of the remainder of the story. That, of course, makes the story very hard to talk about because I can't tell you anything about it because that would take away so much from the story. I remember the first time it happened, I was like, wait a minute, what's happening right now? At the same time, it is an incredibly fun and interesting concept to explore throughout this story. Of course, we are set in space, which is very cold and isolated and doesn't have really any life other than the two boys that we are following. So I think that's a really interesting and fun setting to be in during a winter read. I also like the concept of coming together, working together, kind of taking your differences and turning those into strengths. A lot of people treat the holidays as a time to put your differences aside and just come together and have a good time. It would be great if they did that year round, if I'm being honest, but it's definitely the vibe this time of year and this story gives it. I really think that the romance was really heartwarming and at times heartbreaking, and I thought that the ending really gave us hope for a new beginning for the human race, and so I definitely recommend checking out the story. I listened to the audiobook and I highly suggest that you do so as well. All right guys, so those are the 6 books I'm recommending you this winter. I hope that you have the opportunity to read or listen to them. If you have read any of these, I would love to know what you thought of them down below. As always, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!